Smallhope talking about her family. It would probably be useful at this point to include a little information about us, the Smallhopes, where we live, a bit of family history, and so forth. I know it's fashionable for people to claim their ancestors came over with the conqueror, and for all I know, ours did, among the mercenaries, murderers, escaping justice, and general hoi polloi Duke William recruited because he was desperate for manpower. Basically, if you could hold a sword, you were in. It didn't even matter if you held the wrong end. Anyway, our ancestors bimbled their way through the years, emerging in a minor sort of way in the 14th century, which wasn't a century for its happy times. Not only was there war, rebellions, plague, civil unrest, shit weather, and all the rest of it, but the 14th century also produced Black Ralph Smallhope, who was, by all accounts, a bit of a bastard even by that century's low standards. No one's quite sure whether his nickname was due to his ferocious temper, his hair colour, or his armour. Contemporary accounts are scarce and unclear. The family had settled here at Starlings by then. Chez Nous at the time was a hastily assembled stone keep with a couple of wooden huts tacked on as required. There were no comforts of any kind, which was how Black Ralph liked it, apparently. Anyway, even among Smallhope men, he was a bit of a shit. Black Ralph was married to perfectly normal Agnes. Incidentally, is credited with bringing red hair into the family where it's been ever since. They had 3 sons. I don't know about any daughters, they didn't count. According to the legend, Agnes was pious and kind to the poor and everyone loved her, except Ralph, one of those men who, due to an unacknowledged but massive inferiority complex and an unwillingness to confront their own inadequacies, are always convinced that their wife is having an affair with every man she meets, often a self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm not sure whether chastity belts were a thing then, or ever, but they weren't good enough for Ralph, who went one better and locked Agnes in a cage in 1346, grabbed his sons, and followed Edward III to France. Presumably, he forgot all about his wife because he didn't return for some years. Fortunately for Agnes, she was able to escape the cage and seduce his younger brother, or possibly she did it the other way round, and the two of them were carrying on very happily at Starlings when Black Ralph finally showed up again, minus 2 sons who hadn't made it. The 3rd son brought home a wife and a son, but died a year later, supposedly of dysentery, but George, my brother, and I were always convinced it was the pox. Anyway, Agnes and her brother-in-law celebrated Ralph's return by hurling him down the castle well. Well, a castle well. Buggering up your own water supply is never the best idea. And Agnes wasn't a stupid woman by any means, although it's probably safe to assume that post-cage Agnes wasn't anywhere near as pious and kind as pre-cage Agnes. Her first priority was to eliminate any and all witnesses to this dastardly deed, namely the younger brother, by making love to him there and then as Ralph splashed impotently some 20 feet below ground level. Their cries of ecstasy intermingled with those of her soon-to-be-dead husband as he roared dark curses and tried to climb out, only to lose his grip on the slippery stones, fall back into the no longer fit-to-drink water, and injure himself quite badly. He was still struggling to keep his head above water when his brother, literally, landed on top of him, still unlaced and dangling, as Agnes, taking advantage of his post-coital lack of concentration, upended him into the well too, and then leaned over the coping to gloat at the pair of them. No one knew how long it took them both to die, or even if the story was actually true, until Grandpapa Eustace, whom I vaguely remember as a huge, shouty man, had some work done in the second wine cellar, and a quantity of human bones were found at the bottom of an old dry well. Not wanting to be bothered with police investigations and coroner's courts and other irrelevancies, he threw them back and ordered the concrete poured immediately. Black Ralph's wife, perfectly normal Agnes, showed no signs of remorse whatsoever, never married again, and possibly because of that, lived well into her 80s. She ruled her descendants with a rod of iron and became a great matriarch. As children, George and I spent long hours down in the cellar, listening for the piteous cries of long-dead ghosts clamouring for revenge, until Papa very sensibly pointed out that we wouldn't be able to hear them under all that concrete, would we? And so we went off to play on my Xbox. And before I forget, Starlings is named for the sky full of starlings who, for centuries, have flocked around the rooftops during winter sunsets, sweeping, swooping and swirling in a complex pattern of magnificent splendour and murmuration, and incidentally crapping over everything in sight, which just about sums up the Smallhopes, really. Of Ralph's original castle, only parts of the keep remain, incorporated into one end of the west wing. The house has since been enlarged, pulled down, rebuilt, burned, added to, modernised, Gothicised, and the result is a rambling structure which manages to cover an enormous amount of ground but isn't actually that large. It has no particular architectural merit, but we do have adequate plumbing and heating, thanks to an Edwardian Smallhope who married an American heiress. He had the sense to marry her before introducing her to her new home. She apparently took one look at the place and very nearly bolted, and only by the installation of mass bathrooms, toilets and central heating could she be lured through the front door. I always imagine them laying down a trail of toilets across the floor to tempt her in. Obviously, the benefits of marrying money were plain for even a Smallhope man to grasp, and from that moment on, all subsequent male Smallhopes would marry well, but not necessarily wisely. It's not generally mentioned, but in the early years of their marriage, Grandmama Alexandra actually stabbed Grandpapa Eustace. Sadly, the reason why has been lost to time, but as you can imagine, there was a hell of a row, and he always swore he never dared turn his back on her after that moment. That's it.